Aloha and welcome. Welcome to Global Connections here on the Hawaii's ThinkTech Hawaii series. I'm your host, Carlos Juarez, and a great pleasure today to welcome two guests that are going to join me, a chance to talk about study abroad, service learning, opportunities for young leaders to get out of their comfort zone here in the U.S. and Hawaii and get into Southeast Asia, Cambodia, a country that for some years now we've had a program that takes groups of students here from Hawaii Pacific University. And so I'm delighted to welcome two guests today. First, a colleague, Dr. James Primm. He's a political science professor here at Hawaii Pacific University. And we're also joined by Tabitha Sullivan, who's a student at HPU and herself went on one of these study abroad trips. Let me welcome both of you and thank you for joining us here on Global Connections. I'd like to start as we do, a chance for our listeners to just to get a snapshot about yourselves and what you do. Beginning with you, Dr. Primm, you're a professor here in political science. Tell us a little bit about what you do and how this opportunity of studying abroad, how it fits into part of your professional development.
Okay. Well, I generally have taught political science, but in terms of in 1997. My wife and I went to Cambodia to adopt a little girl, and it was kind of a very interesting time because there was actually a revolution that summer, and there was lots of violence, and so we went there, and it was actually martial law at the time. So we went and got our daughter, only about 2 weeks, and there were situations where you had kids on motorcycles with guns, and you had blackouts every day. It was pretty precarious. But then, I visited the orphanage and I decided I wanted to go back to Cambodia and kind of help out. So I went there for probably 10 years, twice a year, and went to the different orphanages and helped out and brought books and medicine and toys and things like that. And then this guy named Dr. Juarez suggested that, gee, you're going out there, why don't you take some students out there?
Yes.
I said, this is the dumbest idea, but I don't want to take a bunch of students to Cambodia. But then I decided to do that. Yeah. And the first time I taught, I had brought 27 students, which was too many. And then ever since I've been, this is will be my 7th class.
So some years now, and again, it began out of an old personal interest in yours, adopting a child at a different time. And as we'll talk a little bit, I mean, you've seen this country itself transform and change over time. But more importantly, you've been able to now bring a lot of people there to kind of experience that. And that's really the gist of what we want to speak to, opportunities like these to get people out of both their comfort zone, but also connect and get to know a community with an immersion rather than just studying it in a classroom or in a book. And Tabitha, welcome to Global Connections. Tell us a little bit about your background yourself.
Well, from Washington State, I came here double majoring in history and international relations, and when I heard about the trip, I was pretty interested because I was still pretty early on in my majors, and it's like, well, what are the opportunities I have to do with this? And
excellent. And it's a form of, we often use the term experiential learning. That is, you come to the university, you take courses, you do your traditional type, but this is a way of really gaining some, knowledge and experience outside of the classroom. We use that term service learning, and we'll talk about that. What does that mean? It really engaging with the community, right? And in some way giving back, but also bringing your skills to help with others. And Dr. Primm, you've shared us a snapshot about how this program got started and beginning to take students. Over the years now, you've been kind of fine-tuning this program and basically tell us a little bit about what the structure and nature of it is. You take a group of students, the sizes have varied. You had one that was very large, probably too large, and now the groups tend to be a little more smaller. Give us a quick overview of the program itself that you take.
Well, the first time around, as I said, I had 27 students, so we actually had to go to 5 different sites, and there were a couple of orphanages. One was a shelter for runaway kids, another was a shelter for children who had HIVs. Very, very interesting. But now I try to get probably 10 to 12 students, and we basically kind of go to just one orphanage, which is called Sam Rung, which is the orphanage where Tabitha kind of worked. And we actually lived there for 2 weeks. And primarily the children are interested in teaching students, English is a second language, but also we've done things like we've painted buildings, we've kind of put down, last year we put down a couple of tetherball courts. We've kind of done lots of different things like that.
So helping improve their circumstance.
So it's a combination of both education and the notion of service learning. We're really there to serve those children in orphanages.
In some ways, you don't come with the answers, everything. It's more like figure out what their needs are, what can you do that can make a difference. And tell us the orphanages that you've been part of and now the one you're going back to. I mean, what can you say about these children? I mean, are they coming from particular types of families, or are they just part of a large
Well, there's a real big issue about what's called orphanage tourism, and the definition orphan, which we think of traditionally as people who have no parents. Well, the definition actually of the United Nations is somebody who doesn't have one parent. So a lot of these kids have either one parent or no parents, but still the home situation is very precarious. So they're sending these kids to the orphanages partly because they're going to get some schooling, they're going to get some help. So we try to help out there, and also there's a notion of what are they going to do afterwards? The first orphanage I got involved in, we've been able to create some programs where these kids get a year of training, either in culinary arts or fixing bicycles, fixing cars. And we have about, of the 100 kids of that particular orphanage, about 40 or 50 of them are now, because I've been doing this for about 10 years, they're adults, they're 21, 22, they have jobs, some of them have kids, families, and they're on their own. So they're kind of out of the nest, and they're actually they're citizens of their country. So that's kind of the positive aspect.
Excellent. And Tabitha, tell us about yourself. I mean, you had an interest in this, given, a student of history and international relations, suddenly this opportunity to immerse yourself in there. And I wonder if you might just quickly reflect on, what your expectations were and maybe what you saw when you did arrive and you went to this place very out of your comfort zone. This is different from Hawaii, different from Washington State, but here you were suddenly there.
I think I don't really know what I was expecting because it was like my first time really being in a country like that. My previous experience was Costa Rica, and they're very different. And I think it was pretty eye-opening going there because hearing about it is one thing, and then actually seeing it as another, and then interacting with these people. So.
And the children, what age groups are they in? I mean, you've described some that are now in their 20s from many years, but are they pretty wide range of age groups?
Mostly, as early as probably 3 or 4 years old, all the way to 18.
Okay.
Now, the initial orphanage I was at, a lot of them say 18, you're out of the nest, but some of these kids, they're 18 years old, they're still in grade school or they're in high school, and so we didn't have any set notion that you're gone now. We wanted to make sure that they could stay there until they were prepared to go out in the world. And some of them took advantage of that. There's lots of kids kind of hanging around playing volleyball, not studying much, and so we had to kind of edge them out.
And Jim, you described going by the late 90s for initially in a time when the country, Cambodia, was in transition still. Some of us have this sense, if you've studied some history, well, it had a very violent period during the Vietnam War. After that, invaded by Vietnam itself, a massive violation of human rights with genocide and the like. So a country that has had a troubled recent past. And yet, as I think the students who you take have to learn, I mean, like any place, you have to learn the context of this place, the culture, the history. And this is a place that had a grandiose past, a lot of temples and sites that you have opportunities to visit. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about outside of just the actual program that you do, bringing them to work in this orphanage, service learning part. You also include opportunities to get to know the country, sites, visit other culture sites. So tell us more about the
Okay, well, the way the program's structured is, but before we go, we meet at HPU, and we have 2 major sessions. One is there's a woman who's actually married to a professor at HPU, and she was an orphan from Cambodia. So she spends about 3 hours, and she talks about culture, talks about language, talks about what the things to expect and not to expect. Very, very good. Another that we meet with a professor at English as second language, and we have another 3 or 4 hour seminar where some of the students get a little bit of tutoring and say, okay, you're going to teach English in a second world country. This is what to expect. Talks about, keeps it very basic, but at least there's some beneficial stuff. Then, in terms of the culture, the first 2 days we actually go to Angkor Wat, and we go to the temples there, and you can ride an elephant for credit, and there's lots of monkeys, and it's an incredible experience. And at one point in time, Siem Reap was the third largest city in the world, about probably 1500. So they had an incredible kind of civilizational.
And this is the kind of thing that people don't have it at their forefront, realizing that. But when you see that, and I'm wondering, Tabitha, if you can reflect on that, having gone and seeing this clearly evidence of a vast, rich heritage past, the temples. I mean, what does that do to help you think about understanding these people? I mean, what were your impressions?
It gives a really good background. It's kind of like, well, they were the civilization. They've gone through so much stuff, but they're still there. I think it's really interesting. Like. Big point of pride, and people always talking about it.
And again, I think that's critical of, certainly for this case of Cambodia, but any place you go, you need to know that context, the history, and it's what people, gives them a sense of their identity, right? And they're proud. And, again, more recently, maybe a more tragic history and violence that was at the forefront, but they can draw on this larger context of history that's part of that region. And Jim, I wonder if you might, speak to us a little bit about some of the challenges, and from both about this. When you're going to a country like Cambodia, it's got some challenges, socioeconomic, development and the like. It can be a real shock for the senses of somebody coming from outside. I guess it goes both ways. I've heard from a lot of students who come back. I mean, it's just a transformational experience. I mean, your life will never quite be the same. You see things differently, but also, and not just Cambodia, you could go to France, you can go to any other country, and you experience a shock to your system. Right. Talk a little bit about how students have dealt with that, and what are the kind of things you do to prepare. A little bit of his, these briefings and workshops before.
Yeah, I try to be realistic. I say this is an educational experience, but out of the classroom, and it will affect you. And you have to kind of go slow. You have to expect the unexpected. One thing about Cambodia, nothing works as you think it's going to be. So all of a sudden, there's blackouts. The phones don't work. The hotels don't have any rooms for you, and that becomes kind of the part of the learning process. You have to adapt. I mean, I say, America, we're 5% of the world's population, and everything is kind of set out for us. So once you go to get out of your comfort zone, it's kind of it's a learning process.
And the kind of skills that you need for that are vital. You have to have a willingness to stumble and get back up, keep going, and have the unexpected happen. Thinking carefully about that, I mean, things don't work quite the same, and anything you could add to that? I mean, how you saw it?
Well, I think a lot of it's just like, you have to, you see it, and it's like, well, you can't just observe, you have to just get out of your comfort zone and go for it, and just take care of yourself and make sure you know what's going on.
I often say that for these kind of experiences, really anywhere you go in the world, you need a sense of humor, because sometimes if you can't laugh at yourself or, see something that, if you don't have that, little things can really get you and really frustrate you, and suddenly you've got a bad experience and you don't want that. So you've got to be able to roll with certain things, right? And again, sense of humor, it sounds funny to say that, but what I mean is that you are not quite prepared for what's going to happen, and you have to have that readiness.
Yeah, there's some amazing experiences. Like one time we took a group of about 100 children down to the beach, and they had a bus, and they started back to Phnom Penh early. And about 9 o'clock at night, we were following them. We saw the bus on the side of the road, and they were just stopped there. And I got out, well, so what happened? So we ran out of gas. Well, and what's we don't have any money. So here's like 80 kids in a bus at 10 o'clock at night, and they didn't have enough money to get gasoline to even get back to Phnom Penh. And the kids were just, this is normal. And the people I was with said, how could they not plan for this? I said, well, this is Cambodia. This is the way things are. Now, but the other side of it is, I've had over 60 kids who've gone to Cambodia with the classes, and over 20 have gone back on their own. Either taking classes again, working with NGOs. There was one girl she actually was teaching at the university there, Panasastra, to a bunch of monks. So obviously they're getting something out of it. It's not
and it changes their lives. I mean, suddenly for many of those, it's a chance to go back because it was such a powerful experience, right? And you want to both make a difference, but also you develop these connections. And we'll continue our conversation in a moment. I want to take a short break right now, but as we continue, what are the kind of ways in which these experiences transform lives of the individuals? But the other side is the host country itself, because I mean this is a country that receives a fair amount of foreigners who come in, and it can be controversial at times. A lot of NGOs, a lot of the sort of, you said tourism orphanage. Talk a little bit more about what that means, because it does have we have to think carefully about that. Often our desire is that, well, we're only doing good, but sometimes we have to step back from that and realize that not everything is going to be as it seems. We're going to take a short break right now and come back. We're joined today by Dr. James Primm, who helps lead groups of students to Cambodia for service learning, study abroad opportunities, and Tabitha Sullivan, who's a student who's gone on one of these trips, to share some insights. And so join us for more on the story. We'll be right back in just a short moment.
Hi, Jay.
Hi, Keith.
My name's Keith Bettinger.
I knew that.
And I'm the host of ThinkTech Asia.
I knew that too.
Here on ThinkTech.
Fabulous. You got a great show going, Keith.
Thank you very much. And for our viewers out there that are interested in ThinkTech Asia, it airs every Tuesday from 4 to 4:45, and it can be accessed online at thinktech.com.
Yeah, so what kind of guests you like?
Well, we have a number of guests from academia, from practitioners of international affairs. Sometimes we have military officials. Sometimes we have public officials on the show. And our goal, we try to talk about current issues in South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and Central Asia, all throughout the Asian realm, in more depth than you would find in traditional mainstream
That's the
media.
difference, isn't it?
Exactly.
That you're reaching out beyond what ordinary news media would do.
Right.
And that's why we like you so much.
We're trying to provide a thinking person's perspective, an intelligent perspective on what's going on, and we're both sides of the story, or even when there's more than two sides, we try to cover every angle. And I think that that's one of the big benefits that we provide here at ThinkTech. Is it's a really innovative source of educational programming for the people of Hawaii.
You're great, Keith. You are a great host. You got a great show going on. I watch it every week.
Thanks very much.
Why don't you
Jay.
guys watch it every week too, okay?
4:45 to 4 to 4:45 every Tuesday.
Aloha, welcome. We're back and we're live, and I'm your host, Carlos Juarez, here on Global Connections in the ThinkTech Hawaii broadcast series. Today we're looking at a fascinating opportunity that some of our young leaders here from Hawaii have been doing for some years now, a study abroad service learning program that takes groups of students to Cambodia in Southeast Asia. They go for, depending on the time, but they're relatively short term. We'll kind of clarify that, I think about 3 weeks at a time, very much hands-on, because they have opportunities to connect with the local communities there, especially working with some local orphanages, so they really get connected with children and other youth. Jim, I wanted to continue our dialogue about this because as you've seen it now, many different kinds of students have gone. We have traditional undergraduates that go, and obviously that's one angle. The others, we have some other adults who have joined you as well, maybe non-traditional learners that come with more life experience. And I wonder if we might begin with just the idea as well, Tabitha. I mean, what is it that sparks an interest in somebody to go? From your perspective, why are they interested in a place like Cambodia? Because some might have an interest for some reason, but others, it's just curiosity and a desire to somehow just try something different. Any reflections on what inspires them to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a myriad of reasons, and part of it, I say, is just getting out of the classroom. You can learn more in 3 weeks in Cambodia than a whole year of sitting in a classroom and talking about it. And I think they want to know that.
Yeah.
A lot of these students, you say, are older. They've been in the military and they've experienced going overseas, but with Uncle Sam, so they want to kind of go out on their own. I had one student, Paul Reed. You probably know
Yes.
him, and he was 12 years in the military, 4 or 5 tours in Iraq, and he just kind of and he's pretty solid character. So he went out there. He just wanted to experience Southeast Asia as opposed to going back to Iraq, and he was wonderful. And you talk about anecdotes.
Yeah.
One night he did some barbecued ribs, had a big barbecue, Southern barbecue, because he's from Georgia, for 70 kids, and it was just an amazing experience. And if we did it again, he'd basically, I'm going to take a pig and cut it up like Hawaiian style. But so some things like that.
Yeah.
Students just get it. Students just get it.
And Tabitha, you mentioned your interest, just you're a student here, and then suddenly you had this opportunity. But was there anything else that you could say sparked your interest to want to do it?
I've always liked traveling, and I just like going places. I think more like a hands-on learning thing. I learn better when I actually go to a place or I see it in person. And so there's that interest, and then this opportunity to go to Cambodia, and it's like, well, I'm not going to miss that.
Yeah, and like you spoke to that, I mean, all of us like to travel, of course, and well, I think many of us do, but this is more than just travel. It's really an experience of getting immersed deep into the community and making a difference, getting to know them, on a very personal level. And that's important, because often when you have these study abroads, there's often criticism that, especially if, everyone wants to study in Spain or in, sort of traditional sites, but they end up going and just living among other study abroad students. They may not immerse themselves in the same way. You're in Cambodia with these short-term things, but the students are really getting their fingers dirty and kind of learning the ropes and having to take on some challenges. And we've described briefly the notion of culture shock, but beyond that, there are some real challenges going to a relatively less developed country like Cambodia, and everything from the comforts that you're used to. You describe blackouts and things, and these things both, on one hand, they require a set of skills or attitudes or let's say briefings that students should have, but otherwise you're there on the spot and you learn by doing, right? You face these challenges and you have to solve them or overcome them, or just realize that you may not have an answer to that and you just have to roll with it. I want to go back to this idea that, what are the kind of skills, what are the kind of, competencies that students can have? I mean, flexibility, adaptability come to mind, open-mindedness. I suggested, a sense of humor, because you can kind of find yourself laughing both at yourself or things that are done differently. And I think for many, getting out of that comfort zone allows you to see that people on one level have a lot of similar common interests and values, whether it's family, whether it's, food, but there are also a lot of differences. People do things differently, and that often puzzles us, right? And looking at a contrast like Cambodia from Hawaii, from the U.S., and other students that come from different places, what are some things that stand out as like real shocks that are just so different from anything they've ever experienced?
Well, one of the ways the program has evolved that we spend 4 days in a village. There's no electricity, so Facebook is out. The kids have and then no running water, so you have to bathe differently. You have to go to the bathroom differently. You live in their houses, and usually you have a hammock. So it's so extreme, but it's like going to summer camp. It becomes an adventure, and also the students have to rely on each other. They have to rely on the villagers, and there's just certainly hundreds of kids running around, and all of a sudden, but you always feel comfortable. You always feel like you're welcome, and you feel like you're part of their society. So they even though they know less about the world, the Khmer people are saying, okay, this is these crazy white people showing up and kind of doing their thing, and they're very grateful to have anything to have given to them. So when we go out there, we usually bring again, say books, clothing, toys, medicine, and we try to have everything for every student or every villager. And if you're talking about hundreds of people, we actually usually be able to do that. And they're incredibly grateful in terms of what they can get.
Any thoughts you have? I mean, again, either like the things that shocked you the most, but also this idea that you're coming there and sharing, part of their life, and they're opening up to you. I mean, anything you could add?
I think one of the big shocks there was just how many people there were, and just
and a young population, a lot of small children, of course.
Young population, and you can talk to them, and it's like, oh, I'm like roughly the same age as this person, but their experience has been so different. But then you can find like similarities, and you can just like connect on that. I think when we met with the students from Panesastra University, they're like showing us around, and I like history, and one of the girls I was talking with, she was really into history as well, and she's like, I want to be a tour guide, and she wants to present the history of Cambodia, and so we connected over that. It was really interesting.
So again, this idea that on one hand, somebody's doing something similar, studying their own history, looking to help their country by letting people coming in to visit learn it and understand it, and yet on other levels, challenges they face that we might take for granted, things that their day-to-day affairs, require them to deal with. And I wonder if we can turn to this question of, what kind of impact does the outside world have on them? Because on one hand, it's positive, we bring, new, ideas, technologies, money, et cetera, but sometimes there could be maybe a less positive. Sometimes there's a sense that either too much or that we're trying to bring solutions that may not be appropriate. And I'm wondering if you have anything you could share about that. I mean, the question of, is it controversial, contentious, or you even describe this concept of orphanage tourism. I mean, speak a little bit about that.
That's a big issue now, and I actually wrote a paper for it. And what happens, unfortunately, is because Southeast Asia is a very popular place, and there's lots of kind of differences in terms of like ecotourism, and so a lot of people want to go out there and they want to see they get involved, but that's led to the creation of two things. Actually, some orphanages have been created, and they're just really kind of fake orphanages. And the state really doesn't have any kind of regulatory kind of oversight. So they create these orphanages, and they connect up with tour groups, and the groups go through there, and it's like really going to a zoo. They go out there for an afternoon, they pat a little boy on the back, they take a picture, and then they're out of there. And so that's the negative part. I would argue that if it would really be better like if it was a Peace Corps experience, a year or two, even 3 months. We only have 2 or 3 weeks, but if you're 2 or 3 weeks in a village seeing these kids every day, you can learn their names, you can learn about them, and you create, part of the there's a good friend of mine who's a psychologist out there. He says, yes, there is a notion of withdrawal. These kids see these people and they give some affection, they get withdrawal. He says, but these kids get so little affection when they're out there. So it says any kind of love, any kind of affection and attention, it goes a long way. So as a psychology, he says it's more good than bad, but it's always a balancing act. You're always saying, am I kind of the cultural imperialist doing bad stuff out here, or am I really helping out? And it's an important question. It's an ongoing question, and it changes all the time.
Absolutely. And this is a region, of course, the U.S. has a large impact given our involvement in the Vietnam War period and after. But the other thing I'm thinking here, and I'm not sure if you've seen evidence of this, but my sense is that those countries in the region, I'm thinking places like well, on one hand Thailand, but Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, they've got growing middle classes. They have more of the tourism that's happening there is actually kind of regional, internal. They're not all Westerners coming in other words. And I have to wonder, the relations that this particular country, Cambodia, has with its neighbors and sort of different, either tensions or, reputations it might have. And, we often see that different kind of tourists kind of bring different baggage with them. And yet, again, I'm just speaking to this notion that there's a growing number of regional Asian countries that are now touring in ways that they weren't doing 20 years ago, but now suddenly there are. Have you seen any evidence of that?
Yeah, that's a huge issue. I mean, so certainly, there's a pecking order in Southeast Asia, and it's lasts for 1,000 years, because at some point in time, the Khmers, the Khmers, the Cambodians are on top, then the Thais are on top, then the Vietnamese are on top, and the Chinese. And so it's an evolving door. Right now, what's going on is Cambodia, for all its problems, is growing about 6 or 7% a year. So economically, things are getting a little bit better. But a lot of the money coming in is either from South Korea or from China, and a lot of the workers are from Vietnam. So the bottom people are still not necessarily gaining the benefits, and there's some tension there. But you go to say the Central Market, you end up having tour bus after tour bus of loads of Chinese. They go in there, and the Chinese are very aggressive tourists. That's all of a sudden there's this pushback. We love them here, we love them their money, but boy, these guys are noisy, and these guys are pushing around. So it's kind of, so the ugly American, we're kind of moved down the list in terms of more aggressive
That's
tourists.
kind of what I was getting at, that it's no longer the world where just even Europeans or Americans, really it's a growing number of Asians that are now flocking as tourists to parts of Southeast Asia, and it has different dimensions. And tourism is one of those things. Yes, the money is valuable, it does provide development in some way, but it's kind of uneven. And when you have the workers themselves being foreigners, or those who might be benefiting from it, sort of hoarding more of it, these are not places that have a strong social sort of welfare state in any way. So the benefits often get concentrated in a small hand, right? Very interesting challenges. And maybe back as we continue, Tabitha, one of the things that I'm curious from your vantage point as a student, it transforms your worldview, because you're never quite the same person going to these things. You have some idea of it, but then you've come back, and I often like to say that study abroad not only teaches you about the place you go, but you reflect on your own values, things you thought were important that maybe weren't, or things you didn't realize are. Any thoughts on this? I mean, how did it change your values or your views?
Yeah, I think going over there, I was expecting to work with kids, and I've done like day camp events before, so it's like I'm familiar with working with kids, and I thought it'd be the same. But going there, it's like not only are they from a different country, like they have a completely different background, and their like opportunities in the future are completely different. So it's like I'm not gonna help them, I'm gonna work with them, and then it's just like, well, you can't just approach it from the way you've always been approaching it. You can't treat them the same way and work with them the same way. So it's coming back, it's like, well, how do I approach topics like this? Can I approach it from like my standpoint, or do I have to like branch out and start getting these other viewpoints and figuring them in?
And I think that's a good final point. We're going to take another short break and finish our conversation when we come back, but it's really what are the takeaways, what are the outcomes that we've touched on right here, and they're not always obvious. You don't realize them, and sometimes they come a little bit later, but these experiences are critical, especially for the world we're in now, globally interconnected. We need people to get out of their comfort zone, get to places, get to know people, and we'll continue our conversation here with Dr. James Primm and Tabitha Sullivan discussing Cambodia and opportunities to bring young leaders there. We'll be back with more of the story in just a moment.
Aloha! How you doing? It's me, Angus McTech, wishing you to welcome and join us to see us on Hibachi Talk on ThinkTech Hawaii. Join my co-hosts, Gordo the Tech Czar and Andrew the Security Guy, every Friday from 1300 to 1345. We look forward to seeing you. We'll talk tech and we'll have some wee bit of fun. And remember, let your wing gang free wherever you be. Aloha!
How's it? I'm Damon.
I'm Joe.
And we're the Lola Brothers.
We are the Lola Brothers.
We are the Lola Brothers. Hey, join us each week where we'll have wacky animations and adventures, and you'll get to hang out with one of our amazing friends. We'll talk about music and what
Life
else?
in general.
Life in general. All right.
Current events.
Current events.
Technology.
You can tweet us at ThinkTechHI.
Tweet us. We enjoy
And
it.
every Thursdays at 5 o'clock.
Thursday.
Join us.
5.
Aloha, welcome, and we're back, and we're live here again on Global Connections. I'm your host, Carlos Juarez, and joined today by Dr. James Primm, a political scientist here at Hawaii Pacific University, and a leader of he's taken many years now, groups of students down to Southeast Asia, to Cambodia. And these have been great opportunities to connect students into, getting involved with community development issues, providing the service learning opportunities for them to get with orphanages in this case, but also immersion into the culture and getting familiar with this region of the world. And Tabitha Sullivan, a student who has been on one of these trips, is also sharing some of her reflections. And, as we were talking now, I mean, one of the challenges is, okay, it's one thing to prepare and go and have that experience. It's a, wonderful opportunity, change. I mean, not everything is positive, and that's part of it. You have to learn how to deal with challenges and how to get, things solved. But there's also another element, what impact this has both in your own future intellectual development, how does this shape you and the choices you might make in the future. But even more immediate to that, when you come back from these experiences, sometimes it can be a bit of a reverse culture shock. You've gone there, you've experienced it, now you've come back, you reintegrate back into your, let's say your home country. Talk a little bit about that challenge and things that you've seen either that can be challenging or other things that you do to try to help ameliorate that, to mitigate it, this notion of a reintegration back after this experience.
Well, I'll let Tabitha talk about her experience, but before that, one of the things I find is that they have some, there's an intellectual and academic component. They do get college credit for this, so they have to, that's kind of part of the structure. But the service learning, I think, is the best thing to happen. But these people, as I say, we arrived back in the U.S. on a Sunday. They start up school on a Monday or Tuesday. They can't sit in the classroom for 50 hours. There's homework. They still have papers they have to do. It might take 2 or 3 months. So it's just kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm back in America. On the one hand, I'm very lucky to be here, and I'm very kind of appreciative of what we have. But at the same time, you kind of say, okay, but I've lived a different world, and these people don't expect as much as they do there. So there's a culture shock and a disconnect between your old values, your new values, and how you integrate that. Not only just for the months, but okay, how is this really going to be in my life? Do I now want to go to graduate school? Do I want to go out and become a nurse, or do I want to work for an NGO? It's everybody's got to go through that.
That's right.
It's just not just a 3-week thing.
No, that's right. In other words, while that may be the focus time you're in country, there's a preparation before, and then there's an impact after, and how that shapes your future choices and even your values. Tell us a little about your experience. Again, we talked about going there and what motivated you, what you did, but you suddenly came back, and it doesn't end. It's somehow it's still there with you.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's like come back and I want to talk with people about it. It's like this was a really cool event. I've learned so much stuff. I was able to do so many things. And you come back and everyone's like, well, I just had a normal Christmas break. I went to New Year's, went home, and it's kind of like just the difference in experience, and then just getting back into a completely different schedule again. And it's just like, okay, well, I just went to Cambodia, like this just happened, and then it's.
And it couldn't be like student PTSD. I mean, you come back from the war zone and say everything's normal. How about those bears or something?
And somehow it's like a little surreal. Like, wait a minute, last week I was sitting in a hammock without water. Now here I am suddenly, eating at Zippy's or whatever you're doing. Not to underscore this, but often this challenge can be very real, and it can be difficult because, like you said, you come back and you want to share it, you want to talk, and there's an important need for that. You need to debrief, you need to tell that story, because at some point people are like, okay, you went, you're back, get over it, and they're tired of hearing that. This is where what we try to do, in fact, it's important for the students to kind of try to share that in different ways and try to debrief it with family, with friends, with students, and so on. And I imagine there's been times maybe in a future class where you said, well, hey, wait a minute, I was there in this, this kind of, I saw things there that kind of shaped my view differently. Any other thoughts that you could add about, again, that challenge of reintegration, of coming back?
Well, I should be more formal about it. But again, when I come back in the summer, people just dispersed.
It's a little trickier.
During the wintertime, they're back in classes.
Right away.
The first couple of times I actually had some dinners at my house and kind of say, okay, let's get back together again. It's kind of funny because it's almost like we're the only ones who want to talk. We really understand it. And we say, the rest of the world doesn't get this.
Yeah, you have your little inner circle of
so we're
those
kind of have our little missionary group. And so I said, okay, spread that out. Spread the word.
Right. Yeah. Anything else to add there? Or, I mean...
Usually when I go traveling, I take a lot of pictures, and that's kind of like how I record.
She's a great photographer, by the way.
I'd post them up, and I'd bother actually my friends and family and be like,
Yeah,
check this
no,
out, check
look at
this out.
look at this. Yeah.
But-
And this is so true. I mean, the technology is now in every young student has got, either a smartphone or a little, video camera, and that's an important way of capturing that. You've got it, you can then share it, you can post it with social media and otherwise with family and friends, and that's one important way. Now, maybe as we,
Let me interject,
yeah,
here,
please.
Carlos, because it's funny, because I'd say I've got about 100 friends, quote unquote, on Facebook, and half of them are the kids who've been out there, and half kids are in the orphanage. They're all on Skype now, and they're on
Amazing.
Facebook, and they're connecting with each other.
Yes,
They're connecting
yes.
with me, and it's an explosion of kind of
Yeah.
information sharing stuff.
Yeah, and this is remarkable. Again, Cambodia, a relatively less developed country, but you can see this in other parts of Asia, parts of Africa, parts of Latin America, where the simplest technologies are now available, and they can sort of leapfrog, because here, a young Cambodian today might even be in an orphanage, but suddenly they've got friends in another part of the world, and you can just imagine how that must be changing their worldview. This is again that interconnectedness of the world where in the past you would say goodbye. Now suddenly, and have you got any that you've been able to stay in touch with over
Yeah.
time?
Yeah.
That's just
Friends.
again astonishing that this is not the world of their parents or grandparents. In the old days you went off, or you just didn't have that.
I get video
continued-
pictures of their weddings in the villages.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
just amazing.
Fascinating. Now, maybe by way of our, winding down, one of the things I want to reflect on briefly is what are the takeaways, and we've touched a little on them, but these are experiences that transform your lives in different ways and make you rethink your own values and appreciate what you have, maybe what you're missing. Often, the short times that these programs take aren't quite the same impact as if you go for a semester or a full year, where you really have to then suddenly adopt a whole nother lifestyle. But nevertheless, these, especially given the contrast of going into a country like Cambodia, where much less developed, much less sort of whatever infrastructure in places, and so you come away from that a changed person. I mean, we say that, and you see it. I see it happen often. The students that have come back, they've just got a different sense of either a new purpose of what they're interested in and new issues that they hadn't thought about, or just a hunger to want to travel more, see more. And I mean, Tabitha, in your case, you came back. First, you have the initial excitement of getting back, and maybe initial depression that everyone's tired of hearing about it or whatever. But beyond that, I mean, this is something that now you've had a taste of it. Either could be to go back to the same place or to see other places. I mean, has it had an impact in you in that way of wanting to learn more about other cultures and people?
Yeah, actually coming back, I did another study abroad about a year later for a year, but it's like coming back, it's like, wow, I've learned so much stuff. It's hands-on, and it's like I can use this, I can go somewhere else, like kind of share what I've learned, and then like kind of take the viewpoints and the information I learned there and just kind of like use it to shape mine.
Where was your subsequent one?
London.
London, England. So that's kind of a different world, somewhat, of course.
Problem
But
with the language there.
that's right, and people always, they speak our language. Not quite. Everything is very different there, and not to mention crossing the street, you got to look the opposite way, otherwise you'll get killed. But no, even something like a study abroad experience in England, I mean, it reorients your values and your way of thinking too. So these are very important, especially as we look to the future leaders that we need, the world that we're in, where you have to go out and see that world, which you've done, and I commend you for that. But I like to tell people too, even if you don't study abroad, guess what? The world is coming to you, and we've got communities here in Hawaii and other parts of the mainland, Cambodian communities that are very much integrated there, and you have to understand their values, their history, their context. Going there's no substitute to that, of course. But ultimately, what these are doing are helping us develop cross-cultural skills, how to work with different people. You'd learn empathy, how to put yourself in other people's shoes and understand their work. And I go back to what we started at the beginning. I mean, often the perception of a country like Cambodia is maybe thought to be, violence, war, genocide. But in fact, there's a lot more. There's a cuisine, there's a culture, there's the aesthetic arts and temples that they've built over centuries. And when you see that and experience it, it gives you a different perception of those people. You appreciate their views more, and you see it in them. They have obviously a history and a context that shapes their culture, right? Any final concluding thoughts? I mean, takeaways, how these experiences impact people and the skills that you described already, that you go on to use in other ways. Any final thoughts, Jim?
Well, the things that I think happen, and I either try to promote it, but it's most naturally, is you learn, first of all, learns a lot of things I learned, patience.
Yeah.
Have to have patience. Tolerance. And I think the final thing is just simply humility. This
Yeah.
is a country which is thoroughly, it should be destitute, and these people, they're relatively happy. They're very grateful for
Yeah.
anything, and it kind of humbles you. Everything's given to you. You say, okay, I need to kind of get my mind a little bit differently
Yes,
because
yes.
these people are have much to give to the world.
Yeah, excellent. And anything you might add again, just in terms of takeaway, final, things that how it's impacted you and.
Yeah, I think it's really impacted, like my academic trajectory is kind of like, well, how do I want to approach, like what classes do I want to take? And then even like going out and trying to get a job after graduation is kind of like, oh, I could, these are the opportunities I have and I can have experience. I can back it up with these, like going to Cambodia. And so it's really cool.
Yeah, and again, I just think that's the world that we're in now. There's more mobility, more opportunities for this, and it's one thing to be a tourist. We all often do that and go see a place, but it's another thing to really get involved and connected with the community, and that's what this opportunity does. You really become part of it, even if it's brief, but you're giving back something. You're understanding people from their vantage point, their daily affairs, and as you put it very well, whether it's patience or even empathy, or like you described. I mean, here's a country that, on one level, very difficult, challenging economic, even political and social, and yet people have dignity, they have pride, they have a way of somehow making do with what they have and being very appreciative, and that makes you think, gosh, all those things we have that, you probably don't really need or you don't appreciate what you have.
Well, because America right now, we're questioning ourselves. We've been on top for a long time, and do we belong here? How can we stay there? The Cambodians are kind of from the bottom, and they're relatively optimistic. Life is getting a little bit better for them, and they kind of see a positive future rather than simply kind of more of a cynical, past. And so it's a very, I find it, I think their mental health in some ways is kind of more grounded than ours.
Excellent. No, very good. And I guess I want to just close by saying, I mean, it's the kind of experience we'd like to see more people participate in because it does help you as an individual. It changes your attitudes, your views. You're more open-minded towards these things. And again, maybe the next time you meet someone from Cambodia, it's not abstract. It's like, wait a minute, I know you. I know your culture. I know your people. I know the food, and that will go a long way to open up a different conversation, right? Quite amazing. Well, I want to thank both of you. Jim Primm is a professor of political science here at Hawaii Pacific University, where for many years now he's been taking groups of young leaders, young students to Cambodia in Southeast Asia, and pretty soon going to be looking at some alternative options in Thailand,
Right.
Another place that he's been quite familiar with. And these are so critical for helping shape our young leaders of the future, both because of the interconnectedness of the world, but also just developing skills that are beyond just dealing with that individual country. Life skills, people skills, reorienting your own values, right, of what's important and not. And Tabitha, I want to thank you, a chance to share some of your insights, and these are experiences that you can take on as you've already done into other places, but I know it will continue to shape your intellectual development, your curiosity. And for our listeners, thank you for joining us here, another episode of Global Connections, where we bring different perspectives, insights, in this case from some who've been involved in Southeast Asia and Cambodia, and they've helped to really open a lot of our young leaders here from Hawaii to this fascinating part. Thank you for joining us here. Stay tuned for our continued episodes here of Global Connections, and we bid you well. Aloha.